And as they say, we're live. I'm Julian Rogers in Kingston, Jamaica. Time for another look at the very latest of what's happening in St Vincent and the Grenadines. Yes, we must keep our eyes and ears on the La Soufrière volcano. And we'll do so in many ways today. First, we look at relief effort. We'll look at the work of the scientists on the ground. And we'll look as well at the patience required to dealing with a volcano. First, to the relief. In another instance of trusting the science, the government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines has reduced the alert level from red to orange in St. Vincent. And that means then that some people will be able to go into the orange zone, but with clear warnings from the authorities and clear warnings not to go into the red zone at all. But let's start first by looking at the relief effort. And some weeks ago, we spoke to the Director General of the OECS, Didacus Jules, about the relief fund that the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States had launched. The target then was to raise 100 million US dollars in 2 weeks. Well, let's find out exactly what's been happening with that relief effort. We go straight to St. Lucia now and welcome Dr. Carleen Radix, who is head of the OECS Health and Social Development Cluster. She's here to bring us an update on the counting. Welcome to Caribbean Bridges.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here on the program.
Tell us, how much money have we raised so far?
Well, Julian, we are not at $100 million yet. $100 million in 2 weeks was an ambitious target, but I think we wanted to send the message that the kind of devastation that's happening in St. Vincent and the Grenadines needs long-term recovery. The infrastructure damage, the damage to agriculture, the devastation on top of the devastation of COVID-19 to our collective economies means that it's going to be a lot. We need $100 million for St. Vincent to recover. So while in the first 2 weeks, we've had direct pledges from individuals to the amount of about 100,000 US dollars, so orders of magnitude less. We've extended the time frame because we know it's for the long haul, and we continue to strive for the target. And I want to say that, our effort is not the only one in terms of collecting relief. We know that the CDMA, the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, as well as directly with the government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, there are channels through which relief efforts are also coming through. So all of it adds up. We have rebranded and relaunched the campaign with the Global Coalition for St. Vincent and the Grenadines, looking to the long haul, still to raise 100 million US dollars in the coming months to help with the recovery effort for St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
Now, I know in these kinds of efforts, you really are not just talking about money now. So for certainly across the OECS, a number of states have responded in kind, so to speak. Can you talk about that?
Absolutely. I think, and this is something I love about the Caribbean region as a whole and about the Eastern Caribbean. We really know how to pull together in times of disaster, and disasters are nothing new. This region has been described as one of the most disaster-prone regions in the world. We are prone to hurricanes. We are on the tectonic plate is there. There's a chain of volcanoes for us here in the Eastern Caribbean, and earthquakes along with that. And more recently, extreme weather events have become more and more common. In 2017, almost half of our member states were affected by either Irma or Maria. And out of those devastating hurricanes, a lot of efforts that are still happening today continue to look to how we can work together, not only to respond, but to be more resilient. So to build more resiliently, both as a people, because as a people we need to be more resilient, but also in terms of infrastructure and environment and the way in which we sort of move forward in these times.
Now you're dealing with a problem of a volcano in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, but you're doing so at a time of COVID wreaking havoc, not just there, but certainly around the world. How do those two things combine to make this job so much more difficult?
You're so right. The combination of COVID-19 and what it brings with it in terms of the need for social distancing, um, hygiene, wearing of masks, etc. And then what it means when you have people suddenly displaced, that they have to be evacuated, that they have to be in shelters. And while I know in St. Vincent and Grenadines there are strict protocols, it means that there's obviously a greater risk around the spread of COVID-19 under those kinds of conditions. So this is one of the reasons that we continue to, as a region, um, lobby for and encourage vaccination among the populations, our collective population, because we expect there'll be movement of people as a result of the volcano. And generally global equity for availability of vaccines. We've been able to vaccinate on average around 22% of our populations based on the vaccines we've received so far through the COVAX facility as well as through donations from India. And we know that right now the government and people of India are going through their own challenges, but it still falls short in terms of what is needed for vaccination of the population.
Prime Minister Gonzalez declared this week, in fact, that a number of Vincentians are still opting to relocate to neighboring countries. Are you involved in that process at all?
Yes, very much so. From the time in December when the volcano was put on higher alert, orange alert, all of the OECS member states, and we do have free movement of people across the OECS protocol member states. But all the OECS member states began preparing, especially English-speaking member states, for potential receipt of persons who may have to evacuate. And as the level went to red, we've all gone on alert. Arrangements have been made in all member states to receive, including accommodation, arrangements made for having children get into schooling, for abilities to get social benefits if needed for persons who are able to come across, and to make sure that we're able to keep track of persons who may have to evacuate. And this isn't the first time. After Irma and Maria, we had lots of persons move around the region, some of whom have not moved back to where they were. So this is something that we learned from Irma and Maria, and so we're doing it better this time around, understanding the kinds of challenges that for persons to have to move from a home that they've always known, and trying to make it as comfortable as possible because the whole region is their home.
Talking about Maria, hurricane season is literally here on our doorsteps. How prepared are you?
It's difficult. Resources are stretched. Resources are stretched in response to COVID-19. Resources are stretched in response to what's happening in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I mean, all of our member states are preparing. Preparation is always at the back of our minds, but really and truly, the great concern is, would we have to have 3 disasters happening at the same time, and how would we cope with all of those? So it's important that we do it as a region, because we're able to sort of surge from where it's not affected to where it's affected, and to help each other, because we're stronger together. The only way we can do this is together.
Dr. Colleen Reddix, thank you for joining us on Caribbean Bridges, and the best of luck in the fundraising efforts, and particularly in the relief that you're bringing to St. Vincent and the Grenadines. All the very best.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, so Colleen is responsible, of course, for that human and social cluster, the OECS, which encompasses health, education, social protection, and procurement. We're going to turn our attention now to another side of the relief effort, an international organization called Direct Relief. It's made up of units in 50 US states and another 80 countries, including Puerto Rico, where one man who is in charge there is Vincent is Luis David Rodriguez. He's just come back from St. Vincent, and he's here to tell us exactly what kind of work direct relief was brought to this particular situation in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Welcome, sir. How are you doing?
I'm good, Julian. Thank you. Thank you for having me, and pleasure to be here with you guys.
Let's talk first about your trips to St. Lucia and St. Vincent.
Yeah, I was there last week. Direct relief. I am based in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria. So after this situation with the volcano in St. Vincent, um, direct relief through our partners in the region, which are OECS, PAHO, SEDIMA. We sent a few shipments within the last 3 weeks. We've sent three shipments to San Lucia and one to Barbados for this volcano response. I was there in San Lucia last week, making sure that the shipments got there okay, and I wanted to get a feel of what's going on in the area. I want to congratulate Carlene and OECS because they're doing a great job making sure those very much needed supplies are getting to the people that need them the most.
So your main thing then is to where's all these supplies come from?
Our headquarters is in Santa Barbara, California. So most of these shipments were shipped from Santa Barbara. Although Puerto Rico is now starting to become a hub for direct relief in the Caribbean, because since we mentioned a little earlier, Carlene mentioned the Caribbean is super prone to all these disasters in the region. So we want to make sure we have supplies in the region so we can react to this. We can respond to these emergencies as soon as possible. So shipment was delivered from San Juan, Puerto Rico to Barbados. It arrived actually this past Monday.
Tell us exactly what kind of supplies are priority items there.
Yeah. So like I mentioned, within the last 3 weeks, shipment arrived. 9 pallet shipment arrived in San Lucia on April 17. That included all personal protective equipment. Those were distributed in St. Vincent and other OECS member states, especially where the evacuees have been placed. Um, Another 19 pallet shipment arrived in San Lucia on April 21st. That included medical supplies such as hygiene kits, wildfire kits, medical backpacks, respiratory medications, burn creams, cots, emergency medical backpacks, and those are being distributed as we speak as well. In the Most of that is going to St. Vincent. Oh, I would say most of it, yes.
When you talk about your organization's role, I want to understand how you came into the Caribbean and how you got involved in the first place. You talk about this going back to the time of Maria.
Yes, Puerto Rico. Well, when Hurricane Irma hit a couple of weeks before Maria, we in Puerto Rico we were actually helping our fellow islands in the U.S. Virgin Islands and the British Virgin Islands, not knowing that 2 weeks later we were going to get destroyed by Hurricane Maria. So direct after Hurricane Maria, as any other Puerto Rican, we wanted to help in any way we could our own people uh, because of the horrible situation we were going through. So this opportunity came about with direct relief. They came to Puerto Rico. We set up an office, and thankfully we've received a ton of donations, funds, and that way we could prepare and do projects in the medical area alongside with the Puerto Rico Department of Health and many other clinics around the island that are direct relief partners. We're
Let's
doing. Sorry, go ahead.
go ahead.
Yeah, we're doing projects from solar energy in the health clinics. Uh, I don't know if I'm sure you guys know, but we were without power for a pretty extended time. So that was a big deal for us is to make sure these health clinics are resilient. So we have a lot of solar projects going on, telemedicine. We have a vaccination campaign in Puerto Rico we're supporting. Um, So many projects that we're able to thank. Most of it, thankfully, to a $50 million donation we received from the pharmaceutical AbbVie, who has their headquarters here in Puerto Rico.
And I'm curious as to how you got involved in the first place, because when I look at direct relief, I see there's a lot of volunteerism.
Yes. Well, actually, it's a funny story. A doctor friend of mine who lives in Miami, who's worked with direct relief in Haiti in the past after the earthquake in 2010, he called me looking for people, for somebody down here who was willing to help with this organization, Direct Relief. At the time, it was an emergency response situation, and that's how I came about knowing and started to work with Direct Relief. Originally, it was just an emergency response temporary thing, and now Direct Relief has opened a full-time office here in Puerto Rico, and for the long run, our commitment is here in Puerto Rico, and like I mentioned, in all of the Caribbean.
Are you expecting to go back to St
Vincent? Probably. I would imagine either St. Vincent, St. Lucia. We also visit. We're very involved in Dominica as well. So I've been in all those islands. But yeah, I will probably visit St. Vincent in the time coming up.
Thank you very much, Luis. Glad to hear the work of Direct Relief. Congratulations and all the very best to you.
Thank you. Pleasure to hear. Thank you.
All right. So there we got Luis David Rodriguez, who is in charge of Direct Relief Office in Puerto Rico, fresh from a visit to St. Vincent and also to St. Lucia, making sure that supplies are there and distributed. This is Caribbean Bridges. I'm Julian Rogers. I'm in Kingston, Jamaica, and making our regular journey down to the Eastern Caribbean to keep tabs on developments there, and particularly to focus these days on what is happening in St. Vincent and the Grenadines and neighboring countries affected by the eruption of the La Soufrière volcano. Talk about the volcano, and I have to now introduce you to two detectives. I call them detectives, volcano detectives. They're on the ground in St. Vincent. First, there's Paul Cole, who's an assistant professor of the University of Plymouth, in the area School of Geography, Earth, and Environmental Sciences, in the Faculty of Sciences and Engineering. And the other detective is Jenny Barclay, who is a professor of volcanology at the University of East Anglia. They've been on the ground for some time now, and we're going to be talking to them to find out exactly what is the very latest now, particularly that the government there has been able to announce that the alert level has been reduced from red to orange, and they've done so with a clear warning to everybody that does not mean that everybody should go rush into the orange center without first being cleared by the authorities to go in temporarily. This is not to just go back in and stay in it at all. And of course, the other warning is still holding for the red zone, where people are warned not to go into that area at all. So let's go join the two detectives I told you about, Paul Cole and Jenny Barclay. Welcome to Caribbean Bridges.
Good evening.
Hello, thanks for inviting us here.
How long have you been on the ground in St. Vincent?
Well, we've been here for 2 weeks now. Yeah.
All right.
We're going home tomorrow.
Okay. So we caught you the right time. So
yeah, perfect time. Perfect time.
Yeah, we're just writing our detective novel while our report, if you like.
All right. I know that you're busy writing that report, and we got you away for a couple of minutes here. So let's talk about the experiences on the ground, but maybe I should start by where you started off in the UK and then target down to St. Vincent.
Okay, so, well, both of us have been linked with volcanoes in the Caribbean for a very long time. Both of us were heavily involved in the eruption in Montserrat from the early days in 1996. So we've had a lot of experience of working in Montserrat and just all through the activity there. So, you know, we've had links with the Seismic Research Centre, and also we've worked on St. Vincent since 2014 as well. So we've got a lot of experience in this region. We've been here many times to St. Vincent and Montserrat. So that's the kind of background that we've come from.
And so as soon as the volcano erupted, you decided, hey, we got to get here. I mean, with travel restrictions and everything else. How did you manage that?
Of course, we have a long collaboration with the Seismic Research Centre, and as you know, they're the absolute fantastic and foremost providers of volcanological information in the Eastern Caribbean. And so they asked us to come and help support them, because obviously what's happened is very rapidly there's been a lot of deposits placed on the island, and it's important to understand those, and we're in a race against time to kind of categorize and understand those deposits before they get washed away by the rain. And understanding these is useful because it tells us something about what happened this time that can help anticipate any changes that might happen in the future.
And I'm curious that you would make a statement like that, because for as long as I've been paying attention to volcanoes, starting with that in Guadeloupe many moons ago, there's always been this unpredictability about volcanoes. So when you talk about understanding the eruption and pointing to the future, it would seem to me that that is the most difficult task, Paul.
Yeah, it really is a difficult thing. I mean, we can't, you know, we can't say that we can predict when a volcano is going to erupt weeks or months ahead. But we can monitor volcanoes, and we're getting much better at it. I mean, the Seismic Research Centre did an excellent job really here in St Vincent. So we can, there's all sorts of ways, clues that we can use to understand what's going to happen, what has happened during an eruption. So really, there's all sorts of ways. And the things that we've been doing, looking at the products, is one of the ways that we can do our detective work, as you like to say, and really work backwards, if you like, to work out what's actually gone on. And that helps us, that will help us in the future. So really, volcanology is a young science. It's still a young science, and we're learning an awful lot. And we don't see many eruptions like this. I mean, this is similar to Monster. We see other eruptions, and we're slowly learning and piecing together the picture. But every volcano, it should be said, every volcano has its own fingerprint and its own pattern. And Soufrière St Vincent is like that as well. It has particular styles and patterns which are not shown by volcanoes like Montserrat, for example.
So Jenny, tell us what you've learned.
Okay, so what we've been looking at, so we'd started out with some dome rock, which was sent to us in the UK by the Seismic Research Centre, and we've been looking at that and what caused the eruption to start and what the composition is. While we've been out here, what we've been doing is looking at the different phases of the eruption. And of course, on St Vincent, people will remember the 9th and 10th of April as a really intense phase. There was ash everywhere. So what we've been trying to understand is what caused it to start to behave like that by looking at the deposits. And then we've also learned what we've been looking at is how that dome that was already sitting there was destroyed, how that kind of helped to control the eruption. And then, of course, in conversation with our colleagues at the Seismic Research Centre, what we're going to do is look at that and relate it to the monitoring signals. And then, of course, because we've been here when it's a bit rainy, one of the things we've been able to do is directly observe the occurrence of these lahars around the flanks of the volcano, these muddy, ash-rich flows of water that happen after intense rainfall. So we've seen how they're operating a little bit at the moment too, which has been useful.
All right, I've got a map here that will show us exactly what you've been talking about in terms of these almost new rivers created from the summit itself, and give us a sense of exactly where water flows would be, etc. If you can see that on your screen right now, let's see if we pull it up right now, and we see the volcano itself, and then the elements of where waters or floods, as we say, I'm working to pull it up for you.
Okay.
But, I think
With these lahars, these mudflows that Jenny's just been describing, I mean, they occur pretty much in all valleys on the volcano. There's been so much ash and debris which has come out during these explosions earlier in April that all that is draping the flanks. And when the rainfall takes place, that occurs pretty much in all valleys. So what you can see there, in the pink colors on there, are probably the pyroclastic flows. And so these are the hot flows of fragments of boulders, these very high temperature, very hazardous flows. So those deposits we know are being washed down the valleys by the heavy rain, because we can, when we see these mud flows, they're steaming, and we know we've been there just afterwards, and the rocks are still hot. So these pyroclastic flows, which are shown by the purple area on the maps, which largely to the southwest, and then being remobilized. But we're seeing lahars also to the southeast as well. And it's pretty much any valley which drains the volcano is at risk of having one of these lahars. And this is one of the reasons why, you know, the government is advising that people really shouldn't be going to the red zone, because of the threat of these things like these lahars, which can occur very, very quickly in short periods of time. And we observed one a few days ago in the Wallaby Valley. You can see the area Wallaby there. So just north of there, there's a sinuous river, and we watched from the area of Richmond there, from a safe region, one of these lahars start, and it took just a few minutes from when it was raining very heavily and just being a trickle in the bottom of the valley to becoming a raging torrent of debris, with boulders really the size of cars and perhaps small buses, which are being washed down the valleys.
So I'm hoping that people will really understand the real serious impact that the volcano is having long after the eruption, because I think this is really the real challenge here, Jenny.
Yeah, absolutely. I was really pleased to hear the description of the OECS and saying how they're in this for the long haul, because this is absolutely something that St Vincent's going to need continuous support through not just this rainy season, but probably further rainy seasons. We went in with Professor Robertson from the Seismic Research Centre on one of the first days we were in the field. We went in 3 days later to that Wallaby Valley, and I could not believe the topographic change that there was in that valley as a result of those lahars on that day. And there's been more since. I mean, it was absolutely phenomenal. Very, very dynamic landscape at the moment. And these flows, I mean, they're dark and muddy looking. They've got a lot of power in them because they're carrying all this material.
I want you to spend a little time, Paul and Jenny, talking about the things you don't see, the gases.
Yeah. Okay, so one of the things that we've been looking at with this deposit, obviously there's a gas specialist who I think you spoke to last week, Dr. Thomas Christopher from SRC, who measures and monitors those gases. And one of the things that's really important about this eruption has been the role that gas plays in driving the magma up towards the surface. So if you imagine you take a Coke bottle and you shake it around and then you let the cap off, that never works out well for you. Well, volcanoes are a little bit the same with the melt and the gas that's coming out. So the way in which that gas is inhibited by the material on the top or the material at the base. So it's really important we continue to understand how much gas is in that system and how much is getting through. I'm glad to say at the moment it feels relatively calm. There's not much indicators of things moving around, but that's why it's so critical to keep an idea on these different processes.
And we got to repeat the warnings for people that they should really avoid those areas, period. I mean, not just the red zone now, but certainly on I mean, there's not easy demarcation between the red zone and the orange zone in these circumstances.
No, I mean, I'm really, there isn't, but the key thing really, I think, is where there's these deep valleys during heavy rain, is stay away from those valleys. That's the critical thing. Mm-hmm. So people are moving back to the orange zone as the government have advised them, and that's fine. But really, the bottom of these deep valleys during heavy rainfall, pretty much any of these valleys, close to the volcano, had heavy ash fall, could be subject to these lahars.
Yeah, I mean, we've been measuring the ash fall, and there's really been an awful lot fallen up in the north of the island, and that all contributes to landscape change over the next while. So it's important to bear that in mind. And it's just really critical with the downgrade in the alert level that we continue to enable Seismic Research Centre as much as possible to continue to do the excellent job that they've been doing of maintaining the monitoring system, because that's what's going to help and alert people should there be a change.
As you talk about monitoring, let me remind people, this is Caribbean Bridges. I'm Julian Rogers in Kingston, Jamaica. we're taking a further and deeper look at the developments in the St. Vincent and the La Soufrière volcano. We got two volcano detectives with us right now. Of course, one is Paul Cole and the other one is Jenny Barclay. I'm going to come back to you in just a moment, both of you, to talk a little bit more about your detective work. But let me bring in Montserratian friend of mine and broadcaster and communicator, Mike Jarvis. He's in London and he's staying up late to join us because he's displaying what I call Job's patience, because last week we tried to have him on, but there were some technical hitches there. But now he's in his man cave and we're hearing loud and clear. So let's bring Mike in here. Mike, I want you to talk about the matter of, I know I keep coming back and pushing you to talk about the patience of Montserratians, but first your reaction to some of the things you heard, and then let's see if you can do a job here.
Thanks a lot, Julian. First of all, I've been defenestrated out of the man cave. So as you can see, I'm in the kitchen. However, on the issue of patience, and this is a very important message coming from what we've been hearing from the experts and Dr. Radix, I'm sorry, and Mr. Rodriguez from Puerto Rico. The situation in St. Vincent, particularly a message for the people of St. Vincent, and especially those who live in that area, that's the red zone, follow the advice of the government of St. Vincent, of the experts from the seismic research units, and some of them are there also from the Montserrat Volcano Observatory. And as far as possible, if there is, as what we're doing here now, a possibility of getting the Montserrat experience across to the people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, let us do that. Because as we're hearing from the experts, predicting when a volcano is likely to erupt, as we are seeing now in St. Vincent, is not particularly an exact science. And the situation in Montserrat has been going on for over 25 years now, and I wasn't there when the volcano erupted, nor during that. I think it went on for about 10 years and maybe more. So I'd like that just to register to the people who are looking and listening to us now. 10 years. Good? The disruption, the dislocation, the social dislocation, the economic dislocation, all of that has to be dealt with. We had a situation in Montserrat where, sadly, a number of people lost their lives because they didn't follow the advice and they went back to their agricultural holdings. And unfortunately, just at that time, the volcano erupted and they perished. It is too dangerous, and I know that it's going to be a hell of a lot of disruption and adjustment and dislocation. The question is it worth the risk to put your life in danger? Back to you, Julian.
All right. And one other thing I want you to talk about is the matter of relocation of Montserratians. At the time when Vincentians are considering, those particularly who are in shelters and so on, that they should take up an offer to go to other UICE states and even Barbados for that matter. What happened in the Montserrat situation?
Well, in the Montserrat situation, you had hundreds of Montserratians who were taken in by other Caribbean UICE countries. You had a significant chunk of the population that relocated to England. You've had a number of people from St. Vincent who came to Montserrat to assist with the rebuilding that to some degree is still ongoing, and we still have a number of people from St. Vincent living and working and assisting in Montserrat. So that relocation, that adjustment, it could put people under psychological pressure. Because Dr. Radix was speaking early on, looking at we're now entering the hurricane season. On top of that, we've got the COVID crisis to deal with. You have people living in shelters. It's not like a hurricane that, well, you know, you're likely to be in the shelter for maybe a few weeks. This could be longer term. Issues regarding social distancing, people needing to get vaccinated. There's a level of frustration I can understand that would enter into that type of environment. But in terms of relocation, as far as is necessary to relocate, if there is that possibility, I can understand that some people will take it. But if I look at the Montserrat situation, people relocated, went to other Caribbean islands, came to the UK, went to the United States and elsewhere. When you have a family, when you have young children, they need to continue their education. In the case of Montserrat, 25 years, or even the 10-year active eruption period of the volcano, that is a long time. And people settle into where they are relocated. At the back of all our minds, we want to go back home. But then it is yet another relocation. And well, St. Vincent has a much bigger population than Montserrat. But I was reading something today in one of the local newspapers of St. Vincent that spoke about something like 22,000 people in shelters and 4,500 people having to be relocated out of the area. Those are significant numbers, even in the situation of St. Vincent. So that has to be managed, and people need to understand that it's not a question of getting frustrated or I need to go back and take care of my animals. Looking for livestock or what's going to happen to the livestock, that is another massive discussion on its own. But at the moment, I think it's just a question of adjusting and adapting to the current reality. It's just too dangerous until the volcanologists and the seismic experts and all of those good people say that it's okay to go back in. Don't even think about it.
Thank you, Mike. Fair warning. Let me go back to the scientists, Jenny Barclay and Paul Cole, and welcome back to Caribbean Bridges. Let me ask you both about the use of technology in this work. How has that helped?
Well, one of the things that really strikes me from our visit has been that the University of the West Indies have supplied the Seismic Research Centre with a drone pilot who's absolutely superb. So one of the things that he's been able to do is fly the drone to take observational images that tell us things about what's going on with the deposits further up the valley, where it's just simply too dangerous for us to go ourselves. So that's the first thing from our perspective of kind of trying to piece together what's been going on with the deposits is the use of drone technology to really see what's going on. And it's a really, really important communication tool, because I think it's important for people to see and understand what's going on. And that's something else that Seismic have been doing so well.
That's right. I mean, a drone is a really useful tool for making observations. But we need to remember that one of the kind of key technology, the mainstay of all volcano observatories, is seismology, studying earthquakes. And we have really good seismologists from the Seismic Research Centre. We've just had Roderick Stewart from the Montserrat Volcano Observatory here. He's just left after a long period here, I think a couple of months on Montserrat, on St Vincent. But we have, there are a number of seismometers really, and those are the things that really allow us to know what's going on in terms of the earthquakes which are going on underneath the volcano. That's the thing which will tell us really when the eruption is over, and whether the eruption is waxing or waning, and that kind of information. We need to use seismometers really to find that out. At the moment, there's very, very little going on. There's very few earthquakes taking place. And this is why the alert level has gone down to orange, in that the volcano is really doing very little. Now, whether that will remain the case, we have to wait and see. I don't think I think we perhaps should give a little bit of reassurance to Vincentians that typically, historically, Vincentian eruptions are relatively short-lived. They're not like the Montserrat examples. So probably this one will also be relatively short-lived. In 1902, the eruption went on for 10 months. But in 1812, there was an eruption that was very similar to this one, and that went on for really just for a few weeks. There's no suggestion, I think, that this eruption might go on for years and years. It might go on for several months. Probably the most likely thing is to be a few more months of activity, perhaps potential activity. But at the current period of time, the seismometers are telling us that really the amount of activity is very, very low, and let's hope it stays that way. But
Yeah.
we'll know that from the seismometers.
Yeah, I think it's very important to say, though, that the recovery process from this is very much going to be in it from the long haul. For all the reasons that people have given, this has happened in a pandemic. You're facing the start of the hurricane season right now. So I think in terms of what's happening in St Vincent, it's really important and really heartening to hear the level of support that there is across the region for this, because this is a really challenging situation.
Is there any comparison to be made with 1979?
Yeah, so the 1979 eruption was explosive like this, but really this eruption is bigger than 1979. We don't actually know. It was still making calculations to try and work out what the amount of magma that was actually erupted was. So we don't know that, but we know from the thickness of tephra, of the ash layers on the flanks of the volcanoes, that they were significantly greater than what happened in 1979. The style was quite similar, but in actual fact, the amount of magma involved this time, 2021, so far has been greater than in 1979.
Yeah.
One of the things I'm really marvel at in terms of the Montserrat situation is the fact that everybody in Montserrat became a volcanologist, and it really was I suspect the credit would have to go to the scientists who were on the ground and the way that they were able to communicate what was happening and to break down all the technical terms, and therefore Montserratians are today able to tell you clearly what is a pyroclastic flow and all the key terms, of course, translated from adults to children, etc. How important is that in the St Vincent context now?
Absolutely, and I think there's been an absolutely sterling job done with that. Of course, there was the Volcano Ready project, which really helped those people who were living in the red and orange zones who engaged with that to understand how to be ready for the consequences of a volcanic eruption. And it's really important to say, I think Mike made a really important point there about the communication and ongoing. The folks at the Montserrat Volcano Observatory are still using the experiences of Montserrat to talk to primary school children. Today, I'm involved in a project that the Montserrat Volcano Observatory are running, and there's been all sorts of things, NEMO and both the Seismic Research Centre here. So you're absolutely spot on. That kind of understanding things and understanding what's going on is a really great power when you have to deal with such an uncertain natural phenomenon. Understanding some of these things really help you make sense of it and help you to make good choices when you are faced with crisis situations.
I bring Mike right back in here to just follow up on that, because you had the job of communicating a lot of the critical information to the public and working with the Montserrat Volcano Observatory, etc.
Well, not 100%, because by the time I went back to Montserrat, I was away from Montserrat during the period of the eruption and the aftermath of that. So by the time I got back to Montserrat, the average Montserratian was actually educating me about the volcano. So from that perspective, there wasn't really a need for me to initiate anything new. Montserrat Volcano Observatory has done and continues to do an absolutely fantastic job in that regard. And Montserratians on the island had already adapted to the reality. And the thing about it is, I think it applies to St. Vincent to some degree as well. Life continues because the volcano is almost, well, from the northern part of Montserrat, it's out of sight. It doesn't mean that it's out of mind, but the population, the community tries to get on with life the best way they could with the rebuilding, and that is an ongoing process. And that goes back to the point I was making before, that, and I understand that the experts who are there with you, Dr. Cole, saying, well, this might not take as long as the Montserrat situation, and I'm so relieved to hear that. But in the interim, while it's going on, I can't stress enough, it is absolutely necessary for the good folks of St. Vincent to just follow what the experts are saying, and don't try to be heroes.
In other words, trust the science and the scientists.
Absolutely, trust the scientists.
Paul and Jenny, you've got to do your reporting. And can we get a sneak peek into what you report when you go back to the UK?
Well, yeah, I mean, we're trying to, as we said, we're trying to really work backwards from looking at the deposits to understand the mechanism of what actually caused this eruption. And as Jenny talked about the gas, what the main thing that was driving this eruption was gas. And prior to the explosion starting, of course, it's easy to think that this eruption started in April with the explosions, but of course it's been going on for three months since the end of December, and that eruption had been effusive, and of course intentions were being prepared. But what we want to know really is, and what we want to try and improve on, is that amount of time which they had here on the island, which is literally a couple of weeks, when we had this particular style of earthquakes. And those earthquakes are what we call volcanotectonic earthquakes, were the kind of signal, the actual warning that we were getting a pulse of gas-rich magma. And what we're trying to do is kind of understand how much of that gas-rich magma was. And ultimately, what we're trying to do is try and improve the water. Can we actually say a bit more about how big that amount of magma is? So how long the explosions are going to go on for, and probably most importantly, give people more warning on other volcanoes. Because sometimes these, St Vincent had warning. It started in December, and yes, we had the earthquakes and the explosions, but it did have a warning, and we had time to get prepared. Sometimes eruptions have with less warning than that. And ultimately, really, what we're trying to do is improve that warning time, I think.
Jenny, your report?
Yeah, he was quite cagey there, wasn't he? So what we're going to report on is we're starting to make a map of where all the ash fell in the island and the different types of ash. We have colleagues working at the Montserrat Volcano Observatory and seismic, of course, who are trying to understand then the knock-on in terms of the impacts for the infrastructure, what was happening with the roof, and those with the roofs of people's buildings. And then what we're also trying to do, as Paul said, is understand those transitions. And what we can tell you is that recorded in those deposits, so to actually tell you what's in the report, as a wee sneak preview of our detective work, we have to do more forensic examination back in the UK. But what we're seeing is there's a change in the eruptive style. And probably what we want to do is understand what caused that, and then ultimately to think about, well, what's important about that? What might be important about that if that was to happen again for St Vincent and other volcanoes in the Eastern Caribbean? So that's what we've seen, is we've got 3 different layers with 3 different styles of explosions.
I think my caginess is that, yeah. I mean, do you really want to know the finer points of the geological detail? It's kind of very technical. So it might seem a little bit dry to some people.
Yeah, but it's really important.
I can only suggest to you, though, that there are geography students watching and will watch this program across this region and be so inspired by your particular detective work that they'll end up just like Dr. Thomas Christopher and study volcanology.
Absolutely, and we've had the privilege of having a really excellent local geologist, Lianka, who's come out with us into the field. She's just graduated from Mona campus in Jamaica, and we've been working with her looking at the deposits, and she's been putting a lot of her geological skills to use, trying to help us unravel what's going on with those deposits. So yeah, absolutely, I do completely take your point on that.
So hopefully we'll be seeing new generation of Vincentian volcanologists coming as a result of this. Just like in Montserrat, they had with Dr. Thomas Christopher and the current director, Dr. Graham Ryan, of course, who are homegrown volcanologists.
I want to stay with that and give you an opportunity to talk as well about the other volcanoes across the rest of the region, and remind people that they're not connected.
Well, I mean, I have to say, historically, some of them have erupted in close proximity, and I can categorically reassure you that's a coincidence. So one of the things that they do all have in common is that what's going on in this setting is, of course, you're in a setting where one plate is going down underneath the other, and that's generating the melt that creates that chain that we see. but they're not connected by secret chains of melt deep underground. They're just connected by that common tectonic environment. So I guess, yeah, I can be reassuring on that point that each of them, so one of the reasons we're able, and seismic did such a good job of interpreting those signals, is because each volcanic system has got its own plumbing underneath the earth, and that's what they're detecting. And so if you've got instruments out in that volcano, you can understand that individual plumbing system. But of course, as you know, in this tectonic environment, if you have a large regional earthquake, it impacts a lot of places across the chain. So in a sort of philosophical sense, they're connected, but in an actual physical tube of magma sense, they're not.
And Kikum
Yeah, my very favorite volcano. Yes. Yeah, Kikum is it's the Caribbean's underwater volcano. It's an extremely active volcano off the coast of Grenada. It's quite different in style and expression because, of course, it's not one that has to struggle to make its way through a lot of crust as the ones that are above the water on the islands do. So yeah, it's very active. It's very active too. I think historically what happens is when one volcano erupts, people notice things, people are heightened and make lots of observations. And so often it leads to this sense that they're all kick off at the same time.
But there are more than one, there is more than one volcano active at any one time,
Yeah.
Although there's no link. So at the moment, there are other volcanoes that are showing signs of life. So southern part of Dominica is having seismic unrest, lots of earthquakes. And that's been going on for some time. Montpellier in Martinique is also showing lots of seismicity. There's been literally hundreds of earthquakes occurring below that volcano in the last. That's been going on for nearly a year now. So it's quite possible that we might see, and they will happen at some point in the future. It's not possible. There will be eruptions on other islands in the future, whether that's next year, whether it's next month or next year, we can't say that, but we know that they are seismically active, and we know that there will be eruptions. That's just the way it's going to go.
To both of you, can you make a comparison between our volcanoes and other volcanoes you studied outside of the Caribbean? Is that useful?
Yeah, it is. So the composition, when we talk about the composition, the chemistry of the magma, the kind of chemistry of the magma that's here on St Vincent is slightly different from that in Montserrat. There's more silica in the magma in Montserrat, which makes it the viscosity, how runny that magma is, very slightly different, and so the behavior of the actual activity is slightly different. But we can compare. So the name of the magma that occurs at St Vincent is basaltic andesite. So it's slightly more runny, but we can compare it with other basaltic andesite volcanoes around the world. So volcanoes like Merapi in Indonesia. There's other volcanoes in Central America, for example, in Guatemala, Costa Rica. There's many other volcanoes around the world that have the same composition as Soufrière St Vincent. So although as I said, that these volcanoes have their own fingerprint and their own style, there are broad things that we can use that will translate to other volcanoes, yes.
Finally, I have to ask you this, and I preface it by saying, there's never a bad happening. So in the case of Montserrat, when all this stuff became available, there was this great grand design and plan that we would find a way in which to use that material and to create building blocks, some new cement, etc., etc. Are either one of you familiar with any kind of value from the material that comes out of these volcanoes that could be of commercial possibilities?
Yeah, so certainly I know around the world, the sort of loose deposits that are generated by these sorts of volcanoes quite frequently get used as road fill. There's a lot of sand and gravel quarrying that happens in different places. So some of these places that Paul just mentioned, it's relatively well developed. Obviously, one of the things that we are absolutely not saying you should be doing is something like that right now, because for all the reasons that we were talking about, the additional dangers associated with the lahars, these sands and gravels on St Vincent are very new and they're still moving themselves around, but certainly this new material is very useful. And of course, we talked to quite a lot of people in an earlier project about the consequences of the 1979 eruption. And something a lot of the farmers in St Vincent told us, that the ash that went over to Barbados was actually something of a gift for them. In that it's actually ultimately, that's why people like to live in volcanoes, because it creates nice fertile soils. So in the short term, it's absolute pain with what's happened with the crops. But in the longer term, hopefully, it's provided some enrichment to the soils. And then, of course, the additional heat that's associated with volcanic activity is something that can be exploited in terms of clean, green energy.
So there we are then. So we have to tap that as a thermal energy source.
Yeah, I mean, an active volcano is a wee bit too much, but certainly the sort of warming of the system that happens to it is something that is very useful. And I know that's something that's being developed across the Caribbean at the moment.
Jenny Barclay, and of course, Paul Cole, my volcano detectives on the ground at St Vincent, soon to go up to the UK via Barbados.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, back to the UK. Yeah.
Well, we certainly want to thank you very much for your particular work on this particular situation in St. Vincent, and we look forward to your reports serving as the foundation for further study and, of course, for response to this situation and that of any other volcanoes, whether here in the Caribbean or anywhere else in the world that you may have an opportunity to serve. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That's Jenny Barclay, Professor of Volcanology at the University of East Anglia in the UK, and Paul Cole, Associate Professor of the University of Plymouth, having served with distinction in St. Vincent on special assignment. I'm going to wrap now by going back to Puerto Rico and to bring my friend back in from Direct Relief. He, of course, is Luis David Rodriguez, and he's back in Puerto Rico from a visit not only to St. Vincent, but also to St. Lucia. You've heard a lot here, Luis. What are your final words?
I think one thing that Direct really emphasizes a lot is we have to is preparedness. So we know these disasters and emergencies are going to happen, especially in this very vulnerable region, which is the Caribbean, with hurricanes, volcanoes, earthquakes, just like we had in Puerto Rico this past last year. So I think emergency preparedness is very crucially important for every citizen in all these islands in the Caribbean. And yeah, we have to be prepared and expect it and help each other. I know, just like me in Puerto Rico, going to St. Lucia and St. Vincent to help with the situation, and we know that we're there for all of our Caribbean brothers around the region.
Thank you very much, Luis. And the last word goes to none other than Mike Jarvis in London. Mike, a word to your friends and family in Montserrat and the rest of the Caribbean.
Oh, well, we're all watching the situation in St. Vincent, and I know that for many people in Montserrat, it brings back memories, and I'm sure that they would love to share their experiences with the people of St. Vincent, the same way the people of St. Vincent assisted Montserrat in its time of need. And already there's been a shipment of aid supplies from Montserrat to St. Vincent. So they're one big Caribbean family.
Thank you again, Mike. Thanks to everybody for joining us. Thanks to all the contributors. And remember, St. Vincent and the Grenadines will continue to need us, not just now, but very much into the future. All the very best. I'm Julian Rogers in Kingston on Caribbean Bridges.